The massacre is putting the spotlight back on race relations in America. As you'd imagine, the U.S. president, who knew one of the victims, says the murders raise questions about a dark part of U.S. history.
Barack Obama called hatred across races and faiths a threat to democracy.
Good news is I am confident that the outpouring of unity and strength and fellowship and love across Charleston today, from all races, from all faiths, from all places of worship, indicates the degree to which those old vestiges of hatred can be overcome. That certainly was Dr. King's hope just over 50 years ago, after 4 little girls were killed in a bombing in a black church in Birmingham, Alabama. He said they lived meaningful lives and they died nobly. They say to each of us, Dr. King said, black and white alike, that we must substitute courage for caution. They say to us that we must be concerned not merely with who murdered them, but about the system, the way of life, the philosophy which produced the murderers. Their death says to us that we must work passionately and unrelentingly for the realization of the American dream. And if one will hold on, he will discover that God walks with him and that God is able to lift you from the fatigue of despair to the buoyancy of hope.
At times angry and emotional, President Obama speaking there, and you heard the reference to the late civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. Well, he and his wife both spoke at the church where the shootings happened back in the 1960s. The King Center for Nonviolent Social Change tweets, "We pray that this person's hate does not cultivate more hate."
Martin Luther King III joining us now here in studio. He is president and CEO of the nonprofit organization Realizing the Dream, and he's also the eldest son of Dr. King. Mr. King, it's an honor to have you. Thanks so much for your time. You know, I'm curious to know what has been going through your mind all day today. I mean, this is a man who allegedly walked into a house of worship and said, "I'm here to shoot black people."
Well, the first thing that went through my mind was the fact of how tragic this is for our nation and for these families specifically. The second thing was in 1974, my grandmother was assassinated in the church while praying the Lord's Prayer. So I quickly went to, oh gosh, this is reminiscent. The circumstance is different, but it was reminiscent because of the fact that in a house of worship, if there's no sanctity and safety there, gosh, what have we come to as a society?
And yet, it's not that we've come to this today. Black churches going back decades have been the targets for madmen, for racists. And even today, your father's church, Ebenezer Baptist, has armed guards outside of it to this very day. I mean, how afraid are congregations of violence when they gather to pray?
Well, you know, I don't know that congregations are afraid of violence, certainly concerned that violence could occur. Provisions have been put in place today to hopefully minimize that. I think what we have to think about is what is creating these consistent incidents in 2015. And we have embraced a culture of violence, quite frankly, and yet we probably don't acknowledge that. Somehow we have to find a way to embrace a culture of nonviolence. That's what my dad taught, and many after him have taught. That's certainly what Gandhi taught. That's certainly what Mr. Mandela and many around the world have taught. We as a nation still have a lot to learn, and it's not a short-term process. Now, there may have been some mental illness here as well. We don't know. We only know what has been reported, and details come out only a little bit at a time.
We had this conversation about, you know, possibly did this guy have mental illness, but when we talk about race relations in America and how far we've really come, there was an op-ed that I saw today in the Washington Post that really struck out to me, and the title of it was, you know, shooters of color are called terrorists and thugs. Why are white shooters called mentally ill? Now, this is written by an African-American professor, Anthea Butler. But does she have a point here?
You know, possibly. But the issue for me is how do we address all of it, whether it is terrorism. This is terrorism, no doubt about it. When the 4 little girls were killed in Birmingham in '63, that was a form of terrorism. And churches that have been bombed from time to time, as was initially stated, is a form of terrorism. So it's not there may be mental illness, but it's terrorism. And we just don't have a good handle on how to address these issues yet. What is most wonderful, though, is to see this community of Charleston and the state of South Carolina coming together across party lines, across ethnic lines. People are concerned. Now, the goal is for there to be enough concern for us to address some of these issues. The president talked about some level of gun control that he did not think would happen. And it's interesting because this nation is infatuated with guns, and yet people will deny that. Well, we need a gun for safety. They talked about this young man at 21, his dad giving him a gun. We don't know yet what that means. But if that is the case, if his dad had not given him a gun, would that mean that he still would not have gotten one? Would that mean he would not have done this? We don't know all of that. What we have to do as a society is create the climate so that love, support, and reconciliation can occur.
How big, though, is the bedrock challenge of racism? There are still a lot of white supremacist groups in this country. The young man who's been arrested seemed to be aping some of their favorite symbols. How many white people do you think in America still hate African Americans?
You know, I don't know what a number is, but it's certainly a minority and I would think just a small minority. I think the overwhelming majority of Americans certainly they may have views that are insensitive, but that does not say that they are racist. The extreme racism is probably a smaller percentage. Unfortunately, it is a percentage that still has to be addressed. I had the opportunity of serving on the board of an organization called the Center for Democratic Renewal that was a monitor of hate crimes, and my wife happened to have been the executive director, assistant executive director. That organization and organizations like it are needed today to monitor these groups, to find out not just how to infiltrate them, but what can we do to create a different climate. In a nation that's free, people have the right to do whatever they want to do as long as they don't hurt others and believe whatever they want to. But how do we create the climate where Americans can work together for the best America that we can create?
For our international viewers who are watching and saying, geez, you know, what is happening in America? Every time I turn on the TV and I see the American media, there's always some kind of racially tinged story, black men dying at the hands of white police officers. In fact, South Carolina was a scene of such an incident that was caught on camera. A black unarmed man, you see him running and a police officer shooting him, and he dies, and the police officer has since been charged. But you know, is it fair to say that this country has not moved far enough? And that, you know, intolerance, bigotry, it's more a part of our daily lives than most Americans would like to admit.
Oh, I think it's fair, absolutely fair to say we've not moved far enough. I also would say that I don't think that there are more incidents. I think that technology is able to capture them immediately now. In the past, people didn't have cameras, camera phones, smartphones today. So the incidents are not necessarily more. It's just that we did not know. Now that we know, perhaps we will work diligently, and we must work diligently to address all of these issues.
Martin Luther King III, thanks so much for being with us once again. We're sorry about the circumstances.
Thank you.